They called it impossible, impractical, and even science fiction. But now, the same voices of doubt in the U.S. are scrambling to understand, how did Africa pull off an electric vehicle that powers itself? Stay with me, because this story flips the global tech script in a way no one saw coming. When word first surfaced that an African innovator had created a battery-free electric vehicle, reactions in Western media ranged from amused to dismissive. Headlines questioned its legitimacy, and experts quickly labeled a hoax, a stunt, or a misunderstanding of physics. This technology claimed to do something no Tesla, no Toyota, no BYD had achieved: generate continuous power without relying on external charging or traditional lithium-ion batteries. The inventor and his small African engineering team insisted their system combined advanced electromagnetic induction, regenerative systems, and proprietary energy recycling mechanisms. It wasn't magic. It was engineering that hadn't been taken seriously because of where it came from. Months later, one of the prototypes was requested for discreet evaluation in the United States. The early reaction? Smirks, skepticism, and the expectation that the test would fail within hours. The vehicle stunned the observers. The EV operated continuously, without plugging in, without battery swaps, and without any hidden fuel-based system. The U.S. testing team reportedly ran multiple diagnostics, looking for external power sources or concealed energy storage. They found none. And just like that, disbelief began to shift into curiosity. As footage and private reports circulated, attitudes began to change. The very people who criticized the idea began asking new questions. Is Africa about to lead the next phase of clean mobility? Suddenly, the conversations were no longer about debunking the technology, but about securing partnerships and access. Behind the scenes, U.S. representatives started reaching out, this time not with doubts, but with offers. Some wanted patents, others wanted collaboration, and a few wanted silence. Now, with word spreading across energy, automotive, and policy circles, the narrative has flipped. The same concept once dismissed as impossible is being called disruptive genius and strategically significant. Countries that once dominated EV manufacturing are now calculating the consequences of a world where charging stations, lithium mining, and grid dependency become less relevant. Meanwhile, African innovators are gaining unprecedented attention and leverage. The world doubted. The world mocked. Now the world is stunned that Africa's battery-free EV has forced a reckoning, technological, political, and economic. Inside the U.S., the revelation triggered quiet turbulence. Agencies and automakers who once dismissed the project began holding emergency briefings. Policy analysts warned that if this innovation scaled without American involvement, it could undercut EV giants like Tesla and Ford, reduce demand for U.S.-backed lithium supply chains, shift emerging tech influence toward Africa, and its allies and insiders push for collaboration. Others whisper about controlling the technology through acquisition, licensing pressure, or regulatory roadblocks. For the first time, the question wasn't does it work? It was who will own it. Unlike past inventions that slipped into foreign hands, this team wasn't naive. The engineers behind the breakthrough formed a protected consortium spanning multiple African nations. Patents were filed locally and internationally. Key system components were kept decentralized across research hubs in 3 different countries. They refused exclusive deals. They refused relocation offers. And most importantly, they refused to let the invention be labeled as a Western discovery after the fact. To silence critics and assert ownership, the African team announced a global demonstration event. Industry leaders, journalists, and government observers were invited, but under strict rules. The moment the vehicle rolled onto the testing track, without charging, without cables, without swapping parts, the audience fell silent. When it accelerated, powered instrumentation, and maintained output beyond expected limits, disbelief turned into applause. The reporters who once mocked the concept now scrambled for interviews. And the headlines shifted from skepticism to awe. While the U.S. hesitated and analyzed, China moved with precision. Within weeks of the public demo, 3 major Chinese EV manufacturers sent quiet delegations to Johannesburg and Nairobi. Unlike the Americans, they didn't question the science. They questioned the price, the partnership terms, and the production timeline. This wasn't just a new EV. This was freedom from lithium dependence, from grid upgrades, and from charging infrastructure battles. Training programs to build African engineering capacity. For the first time, Africa wasn't being offered aid or investment. It was being offered industrial alignment. This sent shockwaves through Washington. As talks with China advanced, U.S. officials held emergency sessions with automakers and energy lobbyists. They realized that if China secured access to this tech, it would undermine U.S. EV strategies for the next decade, disrupt trillion-dollar battery infrastructure plans, make Africa and Asia the new EV power block. Suddenly, American tone shifted again, from interest to urgency. They extended invitations for high-level talks, proposing joint research hubs in the U.S. and Africa, tax incentives for U.S.-African EV integration, fast-tracked approval for manufacturing partnerships. But something was different now. Africa had leverage. Watching the growing tension, the European Union rushed in with its own strategy, green partnerships, climate funds, and promises of fair tech cooperation. They were no longer negotiating with a desperate continent. They were negotiating with the owners of the world's most disruptive EV innovation. Africa was not asking for validation anymore. Africa was choosing its collaborators. In a historic move, the African consortium behind the technology announced plans for the first homegrown self-powered EV plant, co-owned by engineers, governments, and private entrepreneurs across multiple nations. Production within Africa, licensing to foreign markets, not surrendering control, local job creation, and tech transfer, protection from buyouts and suppression. Export-ready models in under 3 years, with no reliance on lithium, cobalt, or rare earth battery imports. Sensing danger, several Western firms quietly attempted to challenge the patents, claiming lack of scientific transparency and unverifiable mechanisms. But the consortium had been strategic. They partnered with international legal teams from India, Brazil, South Africa, and the UAE, building a legal firewall against corporate hijacking. And while critics demanded blueprints, the inventors reminded them, you don't hand the lockpick to the one trying to break in. While global powers debated ownership and access, one African city made a groundbreaking announcement. It would become the first urban testbed for battery-free electric vehicles. The location was strategic, not a capital city, but a rapidly growing tech hub with smart infrastructure plans. The mayor revealed a pilot program involving government transport fleets, municipal service vehicles, university research teams, private ride-sharing networks, no charging stations, no battery swaps, no fuel logistics. The goal? Sensing danger, several Western firms quietly attempted to challenge the patents, claiming lack of scientific transparency and unverifiable mechanisms. But the consortium had been strategic. They partnered with international legal teams from India, Brazil, South Africa, and the UAE, building a legal firewall against corporate hijacking. And while critics demanded blueprints, the inventors reminded them, you don't hand the lockpick to the one trying to break in. While global powers debated ownership and access, one African city made a groundbreaking announcement. It would become the first urban testbed for battery-free electric vehicles. The location was strategic, not a capital city, but a rapidly growing tech hub with smart infrastructure plans. The mayor revealed a pilot program involving government transport fleets, municipal service vehicles, university research teams, private ride-sharing networks, no charging stations, no battery swaps, no fuel logistics. The goal? To prove that the world's first self-powered urban EV ecosystem could launch not in Silicon Valley, Shanghai, or Berlin, but in Africa, and that sent a shock through industry boards worldwide. Major oil interests, already anxious about traditional EV adoption, saw this as an existential threat. If vehicles no longer needed fuel or external charging, the ripple effect would destroy fuel distribution networks, charging station investments, battery mining operations, grid expansion projects. Within days, lobbyists began filing regulatory concern memos, advising allied governments to slow approvals and demand compliance reviews. But here's the twist. Africa wasn't trying to sell the tech to the world. It was implementing it first at home, and no foreign entity had legal grounds to interfere. As public partnerships stalled, the private offers turned darker. Inventors began receiving proposals that sounded less like collaboration and more like buyout or bury strategies. Massive upfront cash in exchange for silence. Demands for exclusive control of the patents. Relocation incentives with strict confidentiality clauses. Veiled warnings about security risks if they refused. But this time, history wouldn't repeat itself. The lead engineers and consortium members leaked portions of these offers to trusted regional media outlets. Overnight, public support surged, making any covert takeover politically risky. In the background, something even bigger was happening. Several foreign governments, not corporations, had already begun confidential talks to reserve production access for defense, logistics, and public transit applications. One Southeast Asian nation reportedly offered funding for 2 manufacturing facilities. A South American country expressed interest in licensing the drivetrain for buses and military transports. And sources claimed that a confidential pre-order agreement was signed with a Middle Eastern state for a fleet of self-powered patrol vehicles. This wasn't a concept anymore. It was a market about to explode. While Western critics tried to stall momentum, something powerful shifted behind closed doors. Leaders from key BRICS nations, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and newly added members like the UAE, held a confidential session focused on one topic: energy-independent transport technology originating from Africa, shared research labs across BRICS territories, patent defense funds against international legal attacks, localized production hubs on 3 continents, a unified EV export strategy that bypasses Western gatekeeping. For the first time ever, Africa wasn't a junior partner in such talks. It was the centerpiece. Frustrated by lack of access, an unnamed Western firm acquired illegally sourced schematics of one of the early prototypes. They attempted to replicate the drivetrain in a private testing facility in Eastern Europe. The leak was traced back to a subcontractor tied to an automotive lobby group. The copy failed, missing core mechanisms protected by compartmentalized design. Legal action was triggered, not by the West, but by an African legal tech alliance that had prepared for this exact scenario. Africa wasn't just inventing. Africa was defending. Frustrated by lack of access, an unnamed Western firm acquired illegally sourced schematics of one of the early prototypes. They attempted to replicate the drivetrain in a private testing facility in Eastern Europe. 3 things happened. The leak was traced back to a subcontractor tied to an automotive lobby group. The copy failed, missing core mechanism protected by compartmentalized design. Legal action was triggered, not by the West, but by an African legal tech alliance that had prepared for this exact scenario. This marked a turning point. Africa wasn't just inventing. Africa was defending. With pressure rising and interest exploding, the consortium made a bold declaration. A global public reveal event would take place in 6 weeks. Not in New York, not in Beijing, not in Berlin, but in Kigali, Rwanda, a symbolic choice representing African innovation, political stability, a vision for future cities, independence from Western industrial legacy. Attendance requests flooded in from governments, automakers, think tanks, and investors, but only selected delegations would be allowed access to the inner technical briefing. The world held its breath as global delegations touched down in Kigali. Security was tighter than most international summits. Cameras were restricted. Attendees were required to surrender recording devices. A quiet hum of disbelief, ambition, and anxiety filled the venue. On stage, the consortium presented not slides, not theories, but a fleet of operational self-powered EVs, each designed for a different purpose. Urban transport model for public fleets. Off-road utility version for agriculture and mining. Military patrol variant with endurance capacity. Compact commercial delivery vehicle. Each ran silently. Each generated its own power continuously. Each was tested live. Western experts whispered about physics, hidden batteries, or stage theatrics until one model was disassembled in real time before a controlled technical panel. There were no lithium-ion packs, no hydrogen cells, no combustion assist, What remained was a sealed energy cycling system built around proprietary electromagnetic architecture and regenerative power symbiosis, a configuration no major automaker had ever commercialized or even publicly explored. A stunned silence followed. Then came the applause. Global reaction. The lines are redrawn. Over the next 48 hours, China signed a multi-factory agreement to co-produce under African leadership. The EU proposed a technology-sharing pact with infrastructure support. The U.S., realizing delay meant exclusion, submitted a co-development partnership request for defense and transport sectors. The UAE offered to build a $5 billion clean mobility city dedicated to export. For the first time in modern history, Africa wasn't responding to demand. It was setting the terms. The consortium unveiled its long-term strategy, shocking observers again. The core technology would not be sold. Licensing would be time-bound and royalty-based, not surrendered. Manufacturing would be Africa first, with foreign production only through joint ventures. A new regulatory body, the African Energy Mobility Authority, AEMA, would enforce standards, protect patents, and oversee ethical deployment. This wasn't just a breakthrough. It was a new industrial order.